There's an expression out of Texas, all hat and no cattle. It's a reference to the Stetson, that oversized cowboy hat popularized in the 1920s, particularly worn by city folk, by the way, not by cowboys, who wanted to look the part of a rancher. Apparently, the phrase was first used in a newspaper article in 1937 out of Oklahoma. Now, people who handle cattle, they know this well. It's not enough to look like a cowboy. You have to be able to live the life. You have to be able to get down with your cattle, know how to guide them to pasture, keep them away from pests, nurse them to health when they're sick, get them water. Cowboy life is hard, almost entirely outdoors. So it's rain or shine, cold or heat, snow, ice, blazing summer winds. It's a hard life. And your hat means nothing if you don't know how to live the cowboy life. Well, I think that's true for Christians too. You can look like a Christian. Sure you can. You learn the lingo, walk the walk. You get into a church, you learn how to fit in, but the question will always be, not what you believe, can you prove it? Can you? Looking at your life, your convictions and standards, your goals, the way you parent your children, the way you spend your money, the way you talk about God, what you do in private. Does it point to a steadfast relationship with the Lord? A true and abiding trust in Him? Faith isn't just about doctrine. No, for Abraham, he believed God, and it meant leaving his home, settling in a new community hundreds of miles away before maps, before any real sense of modern direction. I'm not even sure he knew how big the globe was. Pursuing a family with no children with his elderly wife. Choosing to make a covenant with God and obeying the sign of the covenant in circumcision. If you read about Abraham's life in Genesis, you realize how much his faith in God meant to him and how he lived it out in his life. And almost none of it is deeply doctrinal. People say, I believe, and then they spout all the doctrines that they believe. And while there's doctrine in Abraham's story, his story is intensely practical. Where are you going to live, Abraham? What is your occupation? What about your family? What about your finances? What about the people who live around you? You know, those are questions we ask ourselves. And I know that when we think about doctrine in Christianity, we think on a doctrinal level, what you believe about God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the Bible and the church and sin and salvation and the end times. But practically, most of our faith is really dealing with the mundane, common things of life, marriage and family, parenting, finances, health, politics, community. The Christian life becomes almost involved in the minute decisions. I mean, if you believe that God created the heavens and the earth, mankind, specifically male and female, how does that influence your thoughts about gender issues? I mean, that question alone deals with doctrine, marriage, health, community, and even politics. So from a bird's eye view, we learn about Abraham specifically later in this text in James about Rahab. And James cites this for us, that genuine faith is not dead. It's not without conscience. It is not motionless. Genuine faith is active and robust and practical. Now, consider with me then point number 1. You only believe if you do something about it. Genuine faith has always been active faith. Look back in the text to verse 14. What does it profit, my brothers? That's a reference to fellow Christians. Though a man say, and I'm going to emphasize that word, look at this. Though a man say he has faith and has no works, can faith save him? If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give him not those things needful for the body, what does it profit? Even so, faith, if it does not have works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, you have faith, I have works. Show me your faith without your works. I will show you my faith by my works. James is noting for us that there's a difference between possession and profession. Now, what you say is important. You can claim to have faith. You see that back in verse 14. That claim is verbal. It speaks to people. It's a testimony of sorts. But he later says something that undermines his testimony. Verse 14, I have faith. Verse 15 and 16, I'm going to wish a poor person well without doing anything about it. The person who is a Christian, a fellow believer. You see the word brothers in verse 14? You see in verse 15, he's referring to one of them. So another brother in my church is naked and destitute of daily food. Can we just say, James is saying, worst possible outcome, right? I mean, it's not enough if you only have one meal a day, but you have no meals a day? It's not enough that you don't have a house, but you don't even have clothes to wear? A person is naked and destitute of daily food. So this is an extreme example. Probably the most extreme. And how does the person of faith only say to the person who is destitute, completely without any help, be warmed and filled? I hope you have a good day. I hope your life is good today. I hope you enjoy your life today. I'm not wearing any clothes, and I haven't eaten in 3 weeks, but I hope you have a good day. Depart. I think that's the key word. I don't want to see you anymore. Leave me and be warmed and be filled. Well, that's a greeting. That's a greeting. And I guess on the surface, there's some pleasantry to it. You're being, I guess, kind of nice. Truly, it's more passive-aggressive than anything. You look at a person suffering like that and say, I hope you have a good day, and I hope he socks you right in the mouth, right? I mean, what kind of person would speak that way to another human being? He does nothing to alleviate this man's suffering. Instead, he just says, I will not help you. I choose not to help you. What you say is important. Can we just realize with James how you live is more important? Because it's important to the suffering man, isn't it? How you live? The impoverished man needs help, not platitudes. He needs clothes and food, not a friendly greeting that lacks true compassion. I mean, it's important to him. I would say it's important to you, because now what James is saying, how you interact with this man reveals what you really believe in your heart. When you say to a person who has no clothing and no food to eat, I hope you have a good day, what you are saying is, I choose not to help you. I choose for you to continue in your misery, even though I have the ability to take care of your problem. Do you know what this person should be saying? I don't really believe. You see, those who possess genuine faith actively apply their faith to life. They perform non-meritorious works. James is not referring to law-keeping like Paul is in Romans 4. Now, if you follow the logic, some of you are visiting today, you didn't hear the last 3 sermons, so I understand, and I'm not going to give you a test, okay? So just relax. No quizzes today. It's a special day. If you're following the logic through Romans 4, Paul is talking about a person who thinks by keeping the law, he can earn his salvation. The word works here is not a reference to law keeping. And I know because of the word works, we tend to get this confused in our minds. What Paul is addressing is people who think by keeping the law, they can merit personal salvation. And he clarifies in Romans 4 that such merit is impossible. I can't possibly earn God's favor. That's why it's by grace. James, however, is talking about something different, not law-keeping. He's referring to works that are evidence of an alive, a living faith. He says, I will show you my faith by my works. My works are not my faith, but my works are evidence of what I believe. In other words, my works back up what I say. So when I say that I have faith in God, and I see a brother Christian who is suffering, who has no food, who has no shelter, who has no clothing, my faith leads me to say, I can help you. You've come to the right place. In fact, I'm glad to help you. I'm so glad that God put us together so I can help you. I want you to be warmed and filled. Let me tell you how that's going to work. I'm going to help you be filled with food, and I'm going to help you be warmed with clothing. You see, it's more than friendly greeting. How does a genuine faith Christian respond to the needy? He does give them the friendly greeting, but then he helps meet their needs. Non-genuine faith doesn't do that. Interestingly enough, the non-genuine faith is demonic faith. And it's really nothing more than that, letter B, in your notes. You believe there is one God, you do well. The devils also believe and tremble. But will you know, O man, that faith that has no works is dead. It's dead faith. James says it clearly. This is the kind of faith that is not alive. Look at verse 17. Faith that does not produce works is dead. And I'm telling you, what James is arguing here is that this is the faith, the kind of faith that demons have. They know there's a God, and they even tremble at the fact that there's a God. They believe in his existence, something they know to be true. In fact, I would say it this way, there are no atheist demons, right? There are no atheist demons. But all they do is tremble. Their faith is dead. It does not advantage them or anyone else. So the question is, Jesus died on the cross. Do you believe that? And what does that mean for you? Jesus rose from the dead. Do you believe that? What does it mean for you? I love the passage in 1 Corinthians 15, because Paul, after arguing for the resurrection of Jesus, he kind of ends with this thought. So, he says, be always abounding in the work of the Lord, because you know your labor is not in vain in the Lord. If you believe this is true, it should result in something tangible in your life. At the end of World War I don't know if you studied the World Wars in school. At the end of World War I, the Germans had tried to take over Europe. And in fact, they were, before that, they were just tribes, right? Maybe 100 years before. The Prussians, and we're just talking tribes. Somehow they all banded together and tried to take over Europe and almost succeeded. The French decided to build, do you remember this? The Maginot Line. Now, it didn't succeed because they thought, you know what? These Germans, I'm not sure I trust them. They could be back. Maybe after this guy comes along who's got this, little mustache and tends to have this weird salute, and he's going to come back and he's going to say all these horrible things about Jewish people, and I just don't trust these Germans. So they built this Maginot Line. Now, did it work? No, it failed. But the fact that it failed isn't the point. The fact that they built it is the point. They believed the Germans would return. So in their wisdom, they tried to build some sort of defense for themselves against the attack of the Germans. That was a true faith. They really believed this could happen again, and we want to prevent it from happening again. So this is what we're going to do. That's faith. That's real trust. That's belief. James is saying here, if you believe it, you do something about it. And if you don't do something about it, then you don't believe it. So if you believe Jesus died on the cross, well, what does that mean to you? What are you doing about that? If you believe Jesus rose from the dead, what does that mean to you? If you believe that his Spirit empowers Christians to serve one another in church, do you believe that? If you do, what does that mean to you? You see, this leads us to our second point. I'm arguing, if you believe something, then you must do something about it. So here's my second point. Do you believe? Prove it. Prove it. You have to bring to the table. You have to come to God and say, I believe, and here is how anyone around me knows that I believe. I prove it in my life. In fact, we have two examples of this in the text, Abraham and Rahab. And both of them are kind of dealing with the same idea in just different ways. In Abraham's case, this is letter A, obedience to the seemingly impossible command reveals genuine faith. Look at verse 21. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? See how faith wrought with his works, and by works his faith was brought to completion, made perfect. And the scripture was fulfilled, which said, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God, or the lover of God. So you see, then, how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. Sometimes our faith is tested by commands that seem seemingly impossible. There's just no way. And in Abraham's case, the command is in Genesis 22 to sacrifice his own son. This is bad enough. We read that story because of our indignation against anything close to child sacrifice. I think if we all just sit and are honest for a moment, we'd say the idea of somebody binding his own child, putting him on a bed of stones, taking out a knife, and cutting him open and taking his life is repugnant to us. We all agree with that, I hope. But the real problem here is not just the death of Isaac at the hands of his father Abraham. The real problem is that in Isaac, God had told Abraham, in Isaac will your seed be called. Isaac was the child of promise. Remember, Abraham is an elderly man. His wife is an elderly woman. They have no children. After God promises Abraham that he will have children, his wife Sarah concocts this horrible idea, and she realizes how horrible of an idea it is a little bit later, to do what all the people in the world around them do, which is when you can't have children, you get a surrogate wife. So he decides to take Hagar, Sarah's servant, and make her his surrogate wife, and she indeed has a son named Ishmael by Abraham. But what's actually going on here is that Abraham is learning to trust God. And I laugh sometimes. People say, well, you have to have the faith of Abraham. Do you know how long it took Abraham to have the faith of Abraham? It's like 25 years. It took a long time. In Genesis 12, God says, leave your home and go to a place that I will give you for an inheritance. And he promises him land, seed, and blessing. And Abraham goes, and he goes partway and stops. And he stays there for a long time, a number of years. His father dies, and he picks up his nephew, and then he finally goes all the way into the promised land. He gets into the promised land, and he makes a big calculated error and almost gives away a large portion of the land to Lot. And it is only through the providence of God that he is spared this and Lot's selfishness. And so God in Genesis 13 restates to him the promise. The land is yours, not someone else's. Then in Genesis 15, he still doesn't have a son, and God promises Abraham he will have a son. And by the way, it is at this point in Genesis 15 that finally we discover something true about Abraham. He believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. God gave to Abraham true righteousness in Genesis 15. That's salvation. In Genesis 17, now we jump about a decade, maybe a little longer. In Genesis 17, the covenant is now restated, but it's given with a sign, and the sign is circumcision. And then Abraham circumcises himself. He circumcises all the men servants in his household and the boys, and even his son Ishmael, who is not the son of promise. And it's only then another decade going by or so that Abraham takes his son Isaac and he takes him up into Mount Moriah, a stone's throw from where today is the place where the temple of God should be in Jerusalem. A stone's throw from that place. He takes his son into Mount Moriah and he binds him and lays him on an altar, and he goes to kill his own son, and God spares his hand. And it is at this point that James is drawing our attention. Not back to chapter 15. He's going to mention that, but it's at this point, because what is happening here is the evidence of faith in the obedience of Abraham. The works here then are not meritorious works. This was not law keeping. He's not keeping the Old Testament law. In fact, this is no reference to circumcision at all. What Abraham is doing is obeying God's command to offer up his son on the altar. And why does Abraham do it? We know from Hebrews 11 why he does. Because it says there, Abraham came to this conclusion: God will bring him back to life. God will raise him back from the dead. And so you read in Hebrews 11 what active faith looks like. Hey, Noah, it's going to rain a lot. Open up your Apple weather app and look, rain for the next 10 days. In fact, if they could show you rain for the next 40 days, really bad rain, thunderstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, lots and lots of water. You should build a boat. So what does Noah do? He builds a boat. If Noah says, I believe God says it's going to rain, and he doesn't build a boat, does he really believe? Well, then you've got Abraham, leave Ur of the Chaldees, go out to a place that you'll inherit. You're going to have a son. You're going to have this land. You're going to be a blessing to all the peoples of the earth. If Abraham doesn't do any of that, then he doesn't believe. What about Moses? Moses, God leads Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt. He could have stayed in Pharaoh's household, but he chooses rather, because of his faith, to be with his own people, Israel, in their misery, in their poverty, and he leads them out of Egypt. You do, ladies and gentlemen, what you believe. You only build a Maginot Line in your life if you believe the spiritual Germans are coming back. You only do what you believe. And that's clarified then in verse 23. The scriptures are fulfilled. All the previous promises, Genesis 12, Genesis 13, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, all of those where God is telling Abraham, I will do this for you. Now we see them fully brought to completion. Abraham's belief, which he has back in chapter 15, is now demonstrated for everyone to see. You couldn't see it before, not really, but you can see it now because he was willing to put up his son on an altar. He was willing to prove it. And the fulfillment is evidence that Abraham was a righteous man because God had given him his own righteousness. Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe it, prove it. In your life, prove it. It's not enough to have a profession of salvation. You have to live it out. There's a second example. Likewise, in verse 25. Was not also Rahab the harlot justified by works when she had received the messengers and had sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. This is letter B. Courage to the seemingly impossible scenario reveals genuine faith. Sometimes our faith is tested by situations that require faith that overcomes our fear. Abraham was not afraid. He didn't have a fearful kind of situation ahead of him. He had a command, here's what you have to do, that seemed to him to be impossible. I can't obey that command. That's impossible. But he obeyed because he believed God. Here we have a woman who's not even one of God's chosen people. We read that story earlier in the service. She's heard what God has done in other places, in rescuing Israel out of Egypt, in conquering the kings who are on the other side of the Jordan River, the Amorite kings, Sihon and Og. And I love the king Og. Hi, I'm King Og. What a great name. And Israel had conquered these other places. Egypt was the lone superpower on the earth. And because of what God does in the Exodus of Israel, Egypt never again becomes a superpower. It's never again the lone superpower on the earth. God breaks the back of the Egyptians. And so what we have here is Rahab. I've heard all this, and I'm afraid of God. I have a fear of your God. I know what you can do because of God. You see, she had come to believe in the supernatural. She had come to believe that God was powerful, and she feared him. So courage to the seemingly impossible scenario reveals genuine faith. When I am willing to overcome my fear with my faith, to do what I know to be right, even though it may cost me something that I don't think I can lose. This may cost me my life. This may cost me my livelihood. This could cost me my retirement funds. This could cost me my pension. This could cost me my status in the community. This could cost me everything. What happens here? She does it anyway. Can you just stop and realize how incredible Rahab's faith is? Rahab is known for one thing. She should be known for three things, but she's known for one thing. She's Rahab the, what is she? Rahab the harlot. There are modern scholars who try to say, well, she was just an innkeeper. No. She did have an inn, a bar, where she had rooms above her bar in her house, and even going all the way up to the top of her house. She had place for people to sleep. But she was an immoral, wicked, unsaved Canaanite woman. That's how she's known. She's so well known as Rahab the harlot. Did you know, as godly as this woman turns out to be, Christian men and women don't generally name their children Rahab, their daughters? I mean, it's just, she's so well known as being the harlot. In fact, I heard of a preacher once who preached an entire sermon called Harlot the Rahab. He inverted the names, and he kept calling her Harlot the Rahab. Like the Rahab, that's the bad part. She's the Rahab. She's a wicked, horrible, evil woman who, because of her faith in God, chooses God over Jericho. Stop for a moment. If you remember from, maybe you went to Sunday school as a child, maybe you recently read this story. Jericho is this huge city in Canaan. Walled, giant walls that reach seemingly to the sky. It's impenetrable. You can't get through there. No one's going to defeat Jericho. Jericho is undefeatable. That's the way it appears to be. And she looks at this and says, but they defeated Egypt, but they defeated Sihon and Og. And what does she do? When the spies show up to search out the land, she hides them on her roof under some stalks of grain. She hides them there. And then when the kings, when the mayor, really, they were city kings, so really kind of the mayor of the town. When the mayor sends his people there and says, bring out these Jewish spies, she says, oh, I don't know where they are. And she lies to him. Now, I'm going to tell you something. At this point, there's possibly an ethical violation, right? Because she's lying to the king. She's lying to the mayor of the town. I would argue it's no longer an ethical violation because I don't think it's a lie to not tell the truth to somebody to whom you're not obligated to tell the truth. And at this point, she is breaking her obligation as a citizen of Jericho. She is no longer going to live in Jericho anymore. She is leaving Jericho. She wants out. She doesn't know which way to go. She is leaving Jericho. Now, does she leave Jericho eventually? She does, because Jericho's destroyed by the Jews. I mean, her house is going to turn to rubble at some point. She's going to be saved by the Jewish invaders, but she's leaving Jericho. And then there comes the second thing she should be known for. She marries a guy named Salmon, and they have a son named Boaz. And she becomes part of the Davidic line. She becomes a very important person in Jewish history. But really, it's her faith that sets her apart. When the writer of Hebrews 11 is talking about Noah and Abraham and Moses, he says, but time would fail for me to tell you of all these other people, of Deborah and Barak. And then he's mentioning people, he says, and of Rahab also. She's a woman who was wicked, who turns from her wickedness to faith. She turns from her community to faith. And the evidence of that faith is her courage. She has every reason to fear the king. She knows that Jericho is seemingly unconquerable. She knows the power of the city's army, but she determines to side with Israel in the conflict. And it's her courage that's evidence of her faith. For Abraham, it's his obedience, but for Rahab, it's her courage. And I'm going to tell you, the point that James is making is this. It's not simply that you're obedient to the Lord and what he commands. It's that you trust him wholly and completely. Where other men's hearts would melt, you stand resolute to do what is right because you believe in God and you trust him only for your salvation. And though the whole world stand against you, you say, I will do right because I believe in the Lord. That takes courage. That takes incredible internal fortitude to stand up for the Lord like that. Years ago, I heard a story about a Christian college graduate who was working for a major corporation here in the United States. He was working his way up through the company. He was a mid-level manager. He got a call from the CEO of the company. He said, I'm coming to town. I'm bringing with me a group of executives from our corporate office, and I'd like you to be our host. We're going to be in your town. I've chosen your store, and you're going to be our host. And he said, okay. He set up a dinner for them at a local restaurant. They got to the dinner. Everybody was drinking alcohol, lots of alcohol. And he said, I don't drink. He just had whatever, water, diet soda, I don't know. After the meal was over, all the men were sufficiently loosened up by the alcohol. They said, we want to go to a gentleman's club. He's now looking at this. This is his boss's 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 boss, right? I mean, this is the CEO of the company. He is a mid-level manager in one little city on the East Coast of the United States. He's going, I don't do this. He looks right at the boss. He says, I don't do this. I will not go. And the boss says, okay, well, you're our driver. You're the only one who isn't drunk, so you're driving. So the guy drove them to the parking lot of this club. He sat in the car, and for hours while these men are inside this club, he's thinking, well, my wife's pregnant, and we don't have a lot of money saved, and I'm about to lose my job. I'm going to lose my job because I told my boss's 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 boss that I don't do this, and I'm not doing it, and I'm going to get fired. The men came stumbling out of the club. He took them back to the hotel. The meeting went on another day. He dropped them off at the airport, and nothing was said, but he knew, this is it, I'm out, I'm toast. Now I'm going to tell you something, friends. When you think to yourself, I've got a pregnant wife at home, I have a mortgage on a small house, I'm just starting in life, I've just started my career, I went to college for this, I'm trying to serve God, I'm a member of my local church, and I'm about to lose my job because I will not be part of this kind of sin. And you have to stand up to the head of your multinational corporation and say, I'm not going to do this. That takes what? That's courage. That's courage. That's Rahab-like courage. About 3 weeks later, he said his testimony was he got a call, and it was the secretary for this CEO. And God chose to honor his obedience and his faith. He got a call, and the CEO said, I've been looking for somebody I can trust. I was really impressed by the fact that you were unwilling to do what the other men were doing with us, that you stood up and had the courage of your convictions. I'd like to hire you to come and be my personal assistant. He went from a mid-level manager to like number 2 in the company. I mean, it's like a Joseph story, right? Now, I tell you that story because it's encouraging. I can tell you hundreds of stories where the guy gets fired, because those stories are out there too. And I'm going to tell you something. It takes courage. I was standing in a line with a bunch of Marines in boot camp, and because a friend of mine had written me a letter, and he has very good handwriting, my drill instructor thought some really horrible things that were not true about me, and he was asking me questions, and I was sitting there, and I was now responding to him, telling him, I'm a Christian, I don't do those kinds of sins, that's not part of my life, I'm not involved in those things. And at the moment I'm doing that, the mockery is now being heaped upon my head. And I'm watching other people in my platoon, because now the drill instructor finds it funny. He's going to find all the other people there who don't sin like this, and he's going to make fun of them. And he's going around the room, and I'm just thinking to myself, I didn't enjoy that, but I wasn't about to lie to this person and say I do things that I don't do. That's just because I believe. Rahab believed God. So she left her city, she broke off her relationship with her community, and she saved her family, her whole house. Brother, sister, mom, dad, grandchildren, whatever. She saved everybody. Everybody who believed, who came inside her house during that battle, are saved. Abraham believes God. He almost sacrifices his son, but then he becomes the father of many nations. The exalted father becomes the father of multitudes, the Avraham, the father of many, because he believed God. So I'm asking you, do you have real faith? Not just a profession of faith, but a possession of it? If you do, then it will change the way you live. It will change you. And you will demonstrate that, not in law keeping, not trying to earn your way to heaven, but in love to the Lord, returning back to Him, how much you love Him for what He's done for you. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, I want to thank you, Lord, for this passage of Scripture. And I know that this can be difficult to understand. I pray, Lord, that it was simply explained, easily understood, and if it would be your will, that we would hide these truths in our hearts, particularly for our teenagers and children here, that they would remember these stories of Abraham and Rahab as examples of faith, that this is the kind of faith they need to have, obedient faith to seemingly impossible commands, courageous faith to seemingly impossible odds, and that they would be able to actually stand up for righteousness and truth. Lord, I pray that you would please use this message, if there be people here who don't know Christ, who don't know you as Savior. May today be a changing day where they come to faith. Before I finish,